Battlefield 2042 looks like it's going to be awesome. Graphics look pretty good, but at what cost? In other words, what are the minimum and recommended specs? If you've been checking recently, it just says like soon to be announced or coming soon. However, even though they're not officially posted up on the Steam page and all that yet, it looks like we do now have those system requirements, minimum and recommended, at least for the upcoming beta that they're going to be doing. So these could get adjusted a little bit, before they're officially announced. That's probably why they're not officially announced yet. But let's take a look at what they are. I'd imagine they'll at least be close to what gets officially announced. And then I'll also give you some ideas on what I think these performance targets are. Because, okay, minimum recommended, but what does that mean? Is that 30 frames per second, 60 frames per second, at what resolution, at what settings? And I'll weigh in on my thoughts on all of that. So let's jump into what I found here. So I saw this announced at WCCF Tech. I want to give them credit where credit's due. And apparently they are saying that when the invitations were sent out to the playtest that's coming up to run August 12th through August 15th, that the invitations also included the minimum and recommended PC requirements, which apparently then got tweeted out by people. So in this tweet, we can now see the minimum and recommended PC requirements. Let's take a look at this, and then again, I'll weigh in on where I think this is targeting, and I will help you decide if your GPU and CPU aren't these, where does yours kind of fall in relation to these? I'll help you with all of that, so stick around. Anyway, so from a processor standpoint, Intel, we're looking at a Core i5-6600K for the minimum, jumping up to an i7-4790, which is an older processor, for the recommended. Now, the main difference here being that the Core i5-6600K is a 4-core, 4-thread processor, whereas the i7-4790 is 4-core, 8-thread. It has the hyper-threading. I can show you that here over at the Tech PowerUp database, just to show you I'm not pulling this out of my memory faultily. Or anywhere else. This is your 6600K, which launched back in 2015 with 4 cores, 4 threads. Okay? That's the minimum, and the recommended is the i7-4790, which launched back in 2014, but was 4-core, 8 threads. So it's looking like if the recommended doesn't even require 8 cores, it's just recommending 8 threads. And these are somewhat older CPUs. I would imagine here that you're pretty good as long as you have a recently new 4-core CPU, and you'll be even better off if you have at least 8 threads, even if it's only 4 cores. Obviously, I'd imagine 8 actual cores would be best if you want to push well beyond the 60 frames per second. But honestly, these could probably do well beyond 60, especially if you have the 8th thread. Anyway, just weighing in on what those CPU targets look like. Now let's jump in and look at the memory. So from memory, we've got 8 gigabytes minimum, and we've got 16 gigabytes recommended. That's pretty normal these days. So yeah, there you go. And you probably have to maybe turn a few settings down if you don't have the 16. We'll see how that goes when the game actually gets tested. All right, so for graphics cards, on the NVIDIA side, we've got the 1050 Ti for the minimum, and we've got the RTX 2060 for the recommended. Now, I want to jump in here and talk about this, because for one thing, these are definitely higher requirements than the previous Battlefield game. So this is where I'm going to start weighing in on what I think these performance targets will be. Based on the previous Battlefield game, Battlefield 5, what were their minimum and recommended, and what sort of settings and frame rates those got you. So let's jump in and compare this, and then at the end of the video, I'll help you decide if these aren't your GPUs, where does yours fall? Anyway, so let's jump into, again, to be clear, this is now we're looking back at Battlefield 5. So it came out a few years ago. This is our previous Battlefield game. And I'm on their official page here, and they had a minimum SIST requirement of a 1050 rather than a 1050 Ti that we're seeing here. So it has moved up a bit in the minimums. So don't expect to get as good of a frame rate as you did in Battlefield 5 on the same system. They are increasing the specs. And then from the recommended system requirements that we saw from Battlefield 5, it was a GTX 1060 as the recommended card. Again, now we're looking at a 2060, which is more powerful. So again, these are definitely bumping up the GPU requirements. Interestingly though, if you look at the CPU requirements, we still see the i5 6600K and the i7 4790. So I would expect that on the CPU side of things, there not to really be a change here. If your CPU was running Battlefield 5 just fine, it looks like it should be handling Battlefield 2042 just fine as well. Okay, so now let's jump into what performance targets do I think these are meeting. Again, I'm gonna base this on Battlefield 5. So what I just looked up is people who had the minimum and recommended GPUs and posted benchmark gameplay on YouTube. What kind of frame rates were they getting in Battlefield 5? So Battlefield 5, let's take a look at the minimum. So remember, in Battlefield 5, the minimum was a 1050. And let's see what sorts of frame rates they were getting. So in this video, and I'll link everything in the description, like I said, this is on low settings 1080p. And let's take a look at the gameplay. You'll notice the frame rate right here, and it's not locking 60, but it's looking fairly close to 60, okay? And this is definitely a GPU bottleneck. They're at like 100% GPU usage here. And so they're around 60. So to me, it looks like the recommended system requirements, the minimum system requirements for Battlefield 5 were targeting 1080p low settings at 60 frames per second. At least that's what it was able to deliver. Now, let's take a look at, again, based on Battlefield 5, the recommended system requirements, not the minimums, being a GTX 1060. What did that get you? So I have somebody here, again, and this video does test out other settings, and so did the other one. You can look at these videos again if you need to. But if we take a look at this, this is ultra settings. So this is ultra settings 1080p, and we can see we are in the 60s in terms of frame rates in this particular scene. Obviously, different scenes will be different. But the conclusion I'm gonna draw here is that, at least for the previous Battlefield game, the minimum was targeting 1080p low, and the recommended was targeting 1080p ultra. So with that in mind, let's pop back to our actual game here, Battlefield 2042. And I would say that I would imagine that these are still gonna be what the recommendations are based off of. So I would imagine your 1050 Ti is probably targeting 1080p low, 60 frames per second-ish. And the RTX 2060 is probably targeting 1080p ultra, around 60 frames per second. And again, same thing for the AMD equivalents here. I don't want this video to run on too long, but I will just point you over to the Tech PowerUp GPU database. And this would be a good way to tell where your GPU falls in relations to the one posted in the video. For example, if I pull up a GTX 1050 Ti, we can then look at other cards relevant to that. So this is the one that we were assuming is probably targeting 1080p low 60 frames per second-ish. And then if you find yours on the chart, based on that, you can tell if you are falling below that, and you probably won't be getting 60 frames per second at 1080p low, or you can find out if you are higher than that and will probably be doing better. You could then compare it to the 2060. Again, the 2060 being the recommended card, this would be the one that I would assume would be getting you around 1080p 60 frames per second ultra settings. And again, you can see if you're beating that and by how much, and you can see if you're falling below. So that's how I recommend judging that based on that. And again, on the CPU side, I think if you got a relatively modern 5, 6, 7 years old 4-core CPU, seems like you're gonna be doing okay, and they haven't raised those requirements from the previous game. What do you guys think about all this in the comment section? Are you excited about the game? Don't forget, you can actually get free copies of Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 5 on Amazon Prime Gaming. If you don't have a Amazon Prime membership, I might even put my affiliate link in the description or something if you want to grab that, and I'll maybe put instructions on how to do that in the description. Anyway, I hope everybody has an excellent day.